Picture this. You're staring at your fish finder. It is lit up like a Christmas tree, a huge, dense ball of red and yellow marks. But you know what it is. It's just dinks, crappie, bluegill, 100 of them. You let out a sigh, kick the trolling motor on high, and motor on, looking for that one big solitary arch that screams, "Trophy." What if I told you that you just drove away from the best spot on the lake? Today, we are going to tear down one of the biggest, most common mistakes that trophy hunters make: ignoring schools of panfish. I'm going to show you why those annoying fish are actually a giant flashing neon sign that says, "Big fish eat here." The reason you're not getting bites might have nothing to do with your lure and everything to do with what you're ignoring. So let me ask you, and be honest in the comments below, do you typically move on when you find a big school of panfish? Look, we all want to catch a fish that makes our hands shake, that personal best. It's why we spend thousands of dollars on gear, boats, and fancy electronics. And for years, the prevailing wisdom has been that big, smart fish are loners. They hold tight to some specific piece of deep structure, hiding away from the chaos of smaller fish. We get locked into this mindset. We see a massive ball of bait or a school of crappie, and our brain automatically thinks small fish. It doesn't think dinner bell. We've been trained by old articles and doc talk to hunt for that one perfect isolated mark on the sonar screen. But nature is rarely that simple. This habit, this ingrained belief that we have to separate the small from the large, is causing us to overlook the most obvious signs of a healthy, active fishery. It's time to unlearn that. First, let's get inside a predator's head. A 10-pound bass or a 40-inch pike did not get that big by being stupid or by wasting energy. They are fundamentally lazy. They are built for efficiency. They want the biggest possible meal for the least amount of effort. Now ask yourself, what's easier? Chasing a single fast-moving shad across open water for a small snack, or positioning yourself next to a slow-moving, all-you-can-eat buffet of hundreds of bluegill that are completely predictable? The answer is obvious. That school of panfish is not just a school of fish, it's a mobile restaurant, a giant walking pantry for every big predator in the area. Understanding this core concept of energy conservation is the first step to changing how you see your fish finder screen. The big ones are always looking for the easy meal, and a school of panfish is the easiest meal there is. Now, it is crucial to understand that panfish are not the same as baitfish. When we think of baitfish, we think of small shad, shiners or minnows. Those are appetizers. They are snacks. A school of 1-pound crappie or hand-sized bluegill is something entirely different. For a big predator, this is not a snack. It is a full-course meal. A 5-pound bass can easily inhale a 7-inch bluegill. Think about the caloric value of that one meal versus chasing dozens of tiny minnows. The predator gets a huge energy return for its effort. This is why you will often see the biggest fish in the lake relating to panfish populations, not just traditional baitfish. So when you see that school, stop thinking bait and start thinking steaks. You're not looking at a distraction. You are looking at the primary food source for the fish you want to catch. So, what does that big red blob on your electronics actually mean? It's more than just a cluster of fish. It is a sign of a healthy, active ecosystem. It's the dinner bell I mentioned earlier. Where there is a concentration of food, there will be predators. It is the #1 rule of nature. That school of panfish is like the watering hole on the savannah. All the animals, both prey and predator, are drawn to it. The presence of that school tells you that this area has the right combination of oxygen, temperature, and structure to support life. Instead of seeing it as an obstacle to fishing, you need to see it as confirmation. It confirms that you are in a high-percentage area. You've found the life of the lake. Now, your job isn't to find the fish. Your job is to find the biggest fish in that specific area, and I promise you, he is there. Here is the critical detail that most anglers miss. The big predators, the true giants, are almost never sitting right in the middle of the school. Think about it. That would be chaotic and inefficient. They are smarter than that. They are the guardians of the spot, the wolves circling the flock of sheep. They position themselves on the edges. They hang back, just outside the main group, using the element of surprise. They wait for one of the panfish to make a mistake, to get isolated, to look weak. That is their target. This is why so many people get frustrated. They'll drop a jig right into the middle of the school, catch a few small crappie, and then leave, thinking that's all that's there. They completely miss the 5-pound bass, sitting just 10 feet away, watching the whole thing and waiting for its moment to strike. This leads to a very practical tip for using your electronics. Stop being mesmerized by the giant blob of color in the center of your screen. Train your eyes to scan the edges. Look just off to the side of the main school. Look below it. Look for larger, more distinct marks or arches that are holding nearby. These are your target fish. Use your side imaging to see what is holding 20 or 30 feet to the left or right of the boat, near a piece of cover. Often, you will see the dense ball of panfish, and then, a few feet away, a single much larger mark sitting near a rock or a log. That is the fish you are looking for. He is using that cover as an ambush point, waiting for the school to drift by. Your electronics are a tool, and you have to learn to read the entire story, not just the headline. Let's talk about the vertical advantage. Predators are masters of using their environment to their advantage. One of their favorite tactics is to position themselves below the school of panfish. They will suspend deeper, looking up. Why? Because the panfish are silhouetted against the bright surface of the water. They are easy to see and track. This position gives the predator a huge tactical advantage. They can burst upwards, attack their prey, and use the surface as a ceiling, trapping the panfish and preventing escape. So, when you mark a school of crappie suspended 10 feet down in 20 feet of water, don't assume the bottom is empty. There is a very good chance that a big walleye or bass is glued to the bottom, directly underneath them, just waiting. Fishing a heavy jig or a drop shot. Under. That school can be an incredibly effective and often overlooked technique. Just as they use the vertical space, they are also masters of the horizontal ambush. Predators will almost always relate to some kind of nearby cover or structure that gives them an edge. This could be a deep weed line, a submerged rock pile, a dock piling, or a channel break. They won't just sit in open water next to the school. They will tuck themselves into that cover, using it for camouflage and as a staging point for their attack. Imagine a big school of bluegill feeding along a weed edge. The big pike isn't going to be swimming out in the open with them. It will be buried back in the weeds, its nose pointing out, waiting for one of those bluegill to get a little too brave and wander a few feet away from the safety of the school. Your job is to identify that ambush point and present your lure right there. Now we have to bust a very persistent myth. The idea that all big fish are loners. Yes, some are. You can certainly find a big solitary fish holding on a very specific spot. But many, if not most, of the truly giant, actively feeding fish are nomads that follow the food. They have to. A fish of that size has a massive metabolism and needs to eat constantly. It cannot afford to sit in one place and hope a meal swims by. It has to be proactive. It has to go where the food is most concentrated. And where is that? It's with the school of panfish. So, while you might find a lone giant, your odds are much, much higher if you focus your efforts around these mobile buffets. No food, no fish. It is the most basic rule in fishing, yet we so often forget it in our hunt for a secret spot. So, how do we trigger a strike from one of these lurking giants? The key is to make your lure look like the perfect target. You want it to appear as the one weak, injured, or stupid member of the school that has gotten separated from the group. Predators are opportunistic. Their brains are wired to attack the easy target because it means less energy expended. Your lure needs to be that easy target. Think about how a wolf hunts. It doesn't charge into the middle of the herd. It singles out the young, the old, or the sick on the fringes. Your lure presentation should mimic this. A swim bait that suddenly darts away from the main school, a jerk bait that pauses and looks stunned, a crankbait that deflects off a piece of cover. These actions scream easy meal and will trigger a predatory response from a fish that might ignore a perfectly straight retrieve. When it comes to lure selection, you have to match the hatch, but not in the way you might think. We are not talking about color as much as we are talking about size and profile. If the predator is feeding on 6-inch bluegill, throwing a tiny 2-inch crankbait is not going to get its attention. It's like offering a potato chip to a starving man who wants a steak. You need to present a lure that offers a substantial meal. This is where big swim baits, glide baits, oversized jigs, and magnum crankbaits come into play. You need to have the confidence to throw a lure that accurately represents the size of the forage. It might feel ridiculously large, but you have to remember, you are not trying to catch the 1-pound crappie. You are trying to catch the 10-pound bass that eats those crappie for lunch. While matching the size is often the best strategy, sometimes the complete opposite approach can be devastatingly effective. This is where you use the element of surprise. When a predator is keyed in on a school of, say, yellow perch, their brains are tuned to that specific color and pattern. Throwing a lure that is completely different, like a bright fire tiger or a pure white swim bait, can trigger a violent reaction strike. This isn't always a feeding response. Sometimes it's a territorial or aggression response. The predator sees this strange intruder in its feeding zone and attacks it out of pure instinct. So, don't be afraid to experiment. If the natural presentation isn't working, go for the shock factor. It can be the one thing that convinces a wise old fish to make a mistake. Your approach and your very first cast into this scenario are absolutely critical. You can have the perfect lure and the perfect read on the situation, but if you spook the fish, it is all for nothing. Do not drive your big boat right over the top of the school, scattering them in every direction. That will put the predator on high alert or cause it to leave the area entirely. Instead, approach from a distance. Use your trolling motor to get into position quietly. Make a long cast that goes past the school and allows your lure to enter the kill zone from the side or from above. You want your bait to look like it's naturally swimming into the area, not like it just fell out of the sky. That first cast is your best chance to catch the biggest, most aggressive fish before it knows you are even there. Let's use a real-life example to paint a picture. Imagine you pull up to a large boat dock. Your fish finder shows it is absolutely loaded with a huge school of crappie suspended under the darkest, shadiest part of the dock. The beginner angler will tie on a tiny jig, pitch it into the middle of them, and start catching crappie. But you, the trophy hunter, know better. You use your electronics to scan the perimeter. You notice that 10 feet away from the main school, right next to a deep concrete piling, there is one single large mark. That is your fish. It's a big base, using the piling as cover and the shade as camouflage. Instead of a crappie jig, you tie on a big heavy jig that mimics a bluegill and you pitch it right to the base of that piling. You let it sink, and thud. You've caught the giant that everyone else missed. Here is another classic scenario: the deep weed line. In the summer, deep weed edges are magnets for bluegill and other panfish. They use the weeds for cover and food. You can see them on your graph, a thick band of fish holding tight to that wall of green. Now, where is the big pike or musky? It is not going to be swimming around in that thicket of panfish. It's going to be cruising that weed edge like a highway. It will use the weeds as an ambush point, darting out to grab any unsuspecting bluegill that strays too far. Your strategy should be to position your boat out in the deep water and make long casts that run parallel to the weed line. A big spinnerbait, a swim bait, or a glide bait worked right along that edge is almost irresistible to a predator staging for an attack. In these situations, patience becomes one of your most powerful weapons. A big old smart fish has survived for years by being cautious. It has seen every lure and has been hooked before. It might not commit on the first cast, or the 5th, or the 10th. I have personally watched on my electronics as a big fish followed my lure a dozen times back to the boat before it finally decided to eat it. So many anglers make 2 or 3 casts to the edge of the school, don't get a bite, and then immediately leave. You have to give the fish time. Vary your retrieve. Change the speed. Add a pause. Sometimes you just have to annoy it into biting. Trust that you are in the right place and have the patience to wait for your opportunity. Your electronics can tell you more than just where the fish are. They can tell you their mood. Pay close attention to the behavior of the panfish school itself. Are they spread out and leisurely swimming around? This generally means they are relaxed and feel safe. There is likely no major predator in the immediate vicinity. But what if the school is balled up into a very tight, dense mass? What if it's moving erratically or looks nervous? That is a giant red flag. That is the fish equivalent of a herd of gazelles smelling a lion. That nervous behavior is almost always caused by the presence of a large predator nearby. When you see a panfish school acting scared, you should get very, very excited. You are in the right place at the right time. A predator is actively hunting. Ultimately, this is less about a specific technique and more about changing your entire mentality on the water. It is the biggest hurdle to overcome. You have to actively fight the urge to drive away from those big schools of dinks. You must retrain your brain to see that screen full of small marks not as a dead end, but as a giant flashing X on a treasure map. You have to start thinking like a biologist instead of just a fisherman. Ask yourself, why are these fish here? What is eating them? And where would I be if I were that predator? When you make this mental shift, the entire lake opens up. Spots you've ignored for years suddenly become prime real estate. It's a fundamental change in your approach to fishing. This pattern is powerful all year round, but it becomes especially dominant during certain seasons. Think about the post-spawn period. Big female bass are exhausted and need to feed heavily to recover. They will seek out the easiest, most calorie-dense food source available, which is often spawning bluegill beds. The same thing happens in late fall. As the water cools, all species of fish feel the urgency to bulk up for the winter. Predators will go on a feeding frenzy, and they will target the large schools of panfish that are gathering in their wintering holes. Understanding these seasonal patterns allows you to predict where these scenarios will set up, making you a much more efficient and successful angler. You can anticipate the pattern before you even get on the water. And remember, this strategy is not just for bass fishermen. This concept applies to nearly every major freshwater predator you can think of. Giant walleye are notorious for shadowing schools of perch. Monster pike and musky are apex predators that will set up ambush points near schools of crappie or suckers. Even huge channel catfish will suspend under schools of bait and panfish, picking off the weak and injured. The principle is universal. Find the food source, and you will find whatever eats it. So no matter what species you are targeting, the next time you mark a massive school of panfish, I want you to stop the boat, take a deep breath, and start thinking like a predator. It's a universal language in the underwater world. The final piece of this entire puzzle is confidence. You have to believe in the pattern. The first few times you try this, you might not get a bite. You might start to doubt it and go back to your old ways. But you have to trust the logic. Trust what nature tells you. Find the food. Fish the edges. Be patient. Because I can promise you this. The first time you make a cast to the edge of a worthless school of bluegill and hook into the biggest bass of your life, it will be a moment you never forget. It will be an epiphany. And from that day forward, it will fundamentally change the way you break down a body of water for the rest of your fishing career. That one fish will give you the confidence to trust the pattern forever. So, let's wrap this all up. For years, many of us have been trained to ignore the single most obvious sign of predator activity on the entire lake. We see a screen full of life, and we drive away from it. Those schools of panfish are not a nuisance. They are not a distraction. They are the buffet. They are the reason the big ones are there. The real aha moment, the turning point, is when you stop looking for a single fish and you start looking for the entire ecosystem. Find the food, and you will find the giants that hunt it. The very thing you've been conditioned to avoid is actually the key to your success. It's like searching for a lion in the middle of a barren desert instead of looking near the waterhole where all the zebras are gathered. This simple shift in perspective will open up countless new spots on your home lake and make your time on the water infinitely more productive. Thank you so much for watching. If this video blew your mind a little bit, do me a favor and hit that like button, and be sure to subscribe for more tips that challenge the old ways of thinking. Now, I want to hear from you. What's the biggest predator you've ever caught? And was it near a school of smaller fish? Share your story in the comments below.